Should we begin? Great. Well, thank you to everyone on live on Zoom and in person from Greenwich, and to everyone who will watch this played back. My name is Ryan Fazio. I'm the state senator from the 36th district representing Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan, Connecticut. And I'm very lucky to be here with police chiefs from all three of the towns that I represent, as well as our state's attorney in the Stamford courthouse. So from right to left is Jim Heavey, the police chief in Greenwich, is Leon Krolikowski, the police chief in New Canaan, Tim Shaw, the police chief in Stamford, and Paul Forensic, the state's attorney in the Stamford courthouse. And we wanted to gather here today to do an informational forum on crime and public safety in Connecticut. We're very lucky to have fantastic leadership in our police departments here in this district, including the men on the stage, and a very good judicial system in Connecticut. Great police officers who are highly professional and concerned about the public safety. But as we know, in Connecticut in the past couple of years, rising crime has been a significant problem facing the public and especially some of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in our state. Just to give context to the conversation we're going to be having today, in 2020, homicides rose in Connecticut by 31%, which is higher than the national average. It was much higher than any other state in New England, all of which have a very high degree of social capital, low crime generally, and I think very high standards for public safety. In 2021, homicides in three of the more violent cities in Connecticut, for which we have weekly data, Waterbury, Hartford, and New Haven, have risen 34 or 35% year to date, compared to 86 cities around the country, as compiled by the New York Times. Those cities have only seen a rise of 10% in their homicides in 2021. And then probably what we'll cover more in this conversation today, because it's a problem that is especially facing our area, is a rise in car thefts. So in Connecticut in 2020, there was a 41% increase in car thefts. And in this district in particular, we've seen even a higher rate of increase. In 2020, there was a 44% increase in car thefts in Stamford. There was over 100% increase in Greenwich. And from 2019 to 2021, as Chief Krolikowski will tell you, there's been a 229% increase in car thefts in New Canaan. So these are serious crimes in particular. So there are some low-level crimes that have whose numbers have gone down during the pandemic as people have been inside more. But some of these most severe crimes that we're facing are going up at very alarming rates in Connecticut. And so I wanted to gather together some of the leaders in public safety in our area and in our state to discuss what they're seeing, but also why they think some of these trends are occurring, and most importantly, what we can do about it in a common sense way to make people more safe across our state. So why don't we kind of go down the line for starters and talk about what some of the important trends that the police chiefs in our district here are seeing as it pertains to car thefts, shootings, other types of serious crimes and things that are on their mind generally. Chief Heavey?
So if I was going to look at the statistics for Greenwich, last year we had 130 cars stolen, and to date, and I had to change my my report since this morning, 73 cars stolen this year. So a little bit better, but the one for all those 200 plus cars stolen, every one of them was unlocked, and every one of them had their keys in it. So there's definitely a way for us to work as a community, as a team, to prevent that. I know everyone's probably tired of seeing political signs, but I do have some of my signs that I put up for reminders, whether, lock it or lose it. Sorry, Leon, for blocking you.
That's okay.
And, it's, it has to be a group effort. And looking at crime in Greenwich, those who we do arrest for crimes, about 67% of them are commuters to Greenwich. They're coming to Greenwich to commit crime. This car theft issue is a concern because that's bringing criminals in who might commit other crimes. It also endangers officers who might have to encounter these individuals, just like the public may encounter them on their property. And of course, there's been several changes in our pursuit policy and in the way in which we engage for property crimes, which has kind of hampered some of that to make it safer for the community. But again, it is making it a little easier for people to commit those crimes. So that's part of my concern. Of course, the pandemic might be something people can blame some trends on, but I'm more concerned about the mental health and the isolation issues that have occurred because of the pandemic. So as we come out of that, I'm hoping that there'll be some positive things that'll change as far as generally crime. And then again, last thing, I don't want to take up all the time, and I think Chief Shaw will probably be able to tell you a little bit more about it, a task force that's been initiated to kind of address that. But some of what we need to do is continue to make efforts to address juvenile crime by engaging with the proper services to juveniles before they become status criminals, committing these crimes that are going to end up causing them to end up in, again, in the judicial system many times. So again, looking again, as much as we're going to give you information, we're also looking for some ideas as well. So thanks.
Great. Chief Krolikowski.
Sure. Like Greenwich, our crime rising has been related to stolen vehicles. And we've seen about a 250% increase in stolen vehicles from 2019 to date. So far, 35 this year compared to 21 in 2020 and 10 in 2019. So that's a dramatic increase. Even the last year has been 66% increase. So that's huge. And every one of the cars has been unlocked. So the message here is, I don't have a sign, but I'm putting it up right now. Lock your car, please. And that'll do away with the bulk of these crimes, if not totally eliminate it, stolen vehicle wise. And combined with the stolen vehicles, we're seeing thefts from vehicles and all kinds of things, from laptops to tax records to social security cards, passports, all kinds of valuable stuff, including cash, guns that have been stolen from cars that are unlocked. 95% of the cars that are stolen from are unlocked. So that's another reason to lock your car. And I think I've said this before, the public calls us for help, and we're now calling on the legislature for help. We're saying, we need you to tighten up some of the laws related to juveniles. We need you to fund some programming to give them support services. We need you to put some tools in place to prevent these crimes from happening and help us investigate them when they do happen. And one of the things we'd love to see is GPS monitoring for juveniles that commit 2 or more crimes that are related to this. And it's really to kind of put them under the attention of a probation officer so that they can get the help they need and the guidance they need so they don't commit other crimes and or kill themselves or others. And it's really a juvenile safety issue more than anything else. And we'd certainly love to see more comprehensive support services related to vocational training, related to substance use, related to behavioral health, all that. I think it's really lacking in our state, and there's a real need there. We're not advocating for a cradle to jail kind of concept. What we're advocating for is more funding to prevent some of these crimes and help these kids to become productive adults. And certainly if you commit 12 or 14 vehicle thefts and you get arrested for that and you continue on with more progressive violent acts, the probability of it being a successful adult is very low. So we need to intervene early. And reality is everyone we've arrested so far for stealing vehicles or thefts from vehicles has not lived in New Canaan. And the majority of the vehicles that we're recovering are in Bridgeport, Waterbury, New Haven, in the cities. And we're really calling out for help here. And there's lots of things that we can do. We passed along a lot of concepts and ideas that will work. And we just need the legislature's help, and somebody needs to pay attention to this before we see a tragedy in Fairfield County. There's been other tragedies in the state related to these vehicle thefts and pursuits and innocent pedestrians being killed and other more serious crimes being committed with these vehicles. So now's the time, and that's why we're here, because we care. And our job as public safety is protect and serve the public. And we're saying right now our hands are kind of tied. So we need the legislature to get out there, advocate for us, get the funding, and address this issue quickly and smartly.
Thanks, Chief. And I'm sure Stamford has slightly different profile to some of the public safety issues that it's facing. Obviously, Stamford is a great city. It's also one of the safer cities historically in Connecticut, in part because it has such a highly professional police force. So I'd love to hear some of the the concerns that Chief Shaw has in Stamford currently as
Yeah, I
well.
think to echo what my counterparts have said, it's easy to just say lock your doors. But when this first started, it seemed like when people didn't lock the doors, these kids were taken for joyrides, and then it escalated and they became a little more emboldened. So then these people that were stealing cars, they had guns and they were using robberies. They were taking the cars, they would take them back to their cities, and they would be involved in shootings and things of that nature. So as this epidemic, as we were talking about a pandemic, we have a stolen car epidemic. And we've been reaching out to Bridgeport and Waterbury, and there's task force set up all across the state. But the problem is, once you do identify these people, it's a very difficult thing to do to make the arrest on multiple car thefts and then know that they're going to be coming out very shortly thereafter. And as Leon said, it is something where people have been arrested multiple times. We're talking, some over 8 times that we've had in Stamford. Pivoting a little bit to some of the violence, the uptick in violence, which is what Ryan had brought up. Stamford's obviously a bigger city. We were just recently named the 2nd largest city in the state. So with that comes some of the bigger city problems. And as our assaults have gone up, our murders, our homicides have gone from, maybe 7-8 years ago, there was 3 or 2. Now in the last 3 years, it's gone, we've had 5 in 19, 6 in 20, and 5 this year so far. Aggravated assaults are up, and those are the things that we have to look at. And there is while they're not all juveniles, we have run into this issue with some of the juveniles that are now involved in these homicides. We've had a 14, a 15, and a 16-year-old who have all been involved in separate homicides. And we can track them. We can track them from when they were 12 and, they were on a bad path. And we work with the courthouse and we put them in programs, and we work with the school and we put them in programs. But there has to be a place to get the kids the help they need. So we don't want to incarcerate. That's not why we're here. It's not something we believe in. But is there a place for specialists who are much smarter than me in the medical field that can say, okay, this is how much time this person needs before they're going to be of value to society and they're not going to make another mistake. We have examples of a 14-year-old who the mother said he's going to kill somebody. And 6 months later, he kills somebody. So those are major issues. And we've used that, it's a sad example, but the amount of resources that were thrown at that child from 12 to 14 was immeasurable at every level. And I don't see it as a fault of anyone, except the fact that if he was put in a place prior to and got the resources he needed and was then on a different path, to let the society know we're not going to let him out until we know he's better. I know he's only 13 or 14, but he's the exception to the rule. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a little bit of teeth for the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Not the 95% of the people, the juveniles who make a mistake, they need some help, they need some guidance. The school can help them. That's all well and good. It's the other ones that are repeat offenders 10 or 12 times, and they know they can get away with it. And it's the other ones that just need to be put somewhere until they're healthy enough to come out. And I think that's one of the biggest issues. And we talk all the time. We talk with the state's attorney. We talk with our state legislator. But it's sad. And I think Leon hits it on the head when he says, we hope it doesn't take a tragedy for someone to look at it. I know Governor Lamont recently said he was going to start looking at some of the different aspects of juvenile crime. But I think it was in regards to a 14-year-old who was killed. That's what caused his comments. We don't want that in Fairfield County. So that's why we're here tonight. And I know we have a great relationship with the state's attorney's office. And it's just so the public can hear us as well, that, we're not here to incarcerate juveniles. It's the last thing we want to do. But we need to find a place for these repeat offenders until they're not a menace to society and they're going to be a benefit to society.
And one of the instances that Chief Shaw was referencing was a 14-year-old that I think the governor mentioned recently, who was arrested repeatedly, and his parents were basically begging the state to take firmer action because they could not control their son. And they were worried that the kind of gang life that he had been conscripted into at this formative age was going to put his life at risk. And he was ultimately shot and killed because of the gang life that he, had gone down, been conscripted into. So part of the concern is not just we want to limit the crimes that are being committed for the victims, but the people who are being brought down this path of committing crimes repeatedly at a young age are then going to be at risk themselves of becoming victims of violent crime, because so much of the deaths and violence are interscene warfare, are intergang warfare as well. So when we talk about compassion, it's also a matter of stopping young men from going down a path of crime and kind of chaos and disorder in the first place. And I'm sure that State's Attorney Forensic can talk about that and some other issues that he's seeing as well.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I mean, we had about 3 years ago in Stamford, a gang-related shooting where a 15-year-old was killed in a public housing project. His brother, 14 years old, 2 years earlier, was convicted of manslaughter in the first degree after stabbing someone to death on a street corner in downtown Stamford. So these things are, obviously very troubling. The uptick in crime, I mean, it varies based on the category of the crime, but we do see that there's an upswing in murders the last couple of years. Obviously, there's clearly an upswing in car thefts, even in Stamford. Regarding the juveniles, I think Chief Shaw had it right. I mean, I think the juvenile system works 95% of the time. We don't want to incarcerate kids for screwing up. We want to be progressive. We want them to engage in therapeutic programs, and they are out there. But there's that minority group of kids, that small percentage that continue to commit crimes. And regarding the car theft epidemic, we're frustrated because when you steal a car, especially from the suburbs, if it's over $20,000, you're going to be charged with larceny in the first degree. It's a B felony. However, that charge is not transferable to adult court, no matter how many times you commit that crime. So if you're a repeat offender, you get arrested for stealing a car, you're charged with a felony larceny offense, it stays in juvenile. Okay, there's no jail for juvenile offenders. Okay, they may be held in detention at one of the two courthouses, juvenile courthouses in the state, but their detention status is reviewed by law every 7 days. So they eventually get out. If they commit it again, the case remains in juvenile court. So these are things that I think the legislature needs to tweak to really put some kind of make the kids experience some kind of accountability for their actions, because if they don't, they'll continue doing what they do, and that's a shame. I agree. They're led down a path of crime and violence, and at some point it's too late to change it. I think the public needs to realize when they come to court, we're a reactive agency. People, they come to us. We don't go out and find them. When they come to us, it's almost too late, to straighten them out and to provide them with the services they need to really change. So it's definitely a problem.
Anyone want to follow up? Well, so when we talk about what could the possible causes behind these rises in specific categories of serious crime, things that have been put forward, whether it's the status of juvenile justice laws, maybe alterations that have been made in recent years, maybe the police accountability bill passed last year, general attitudes towards policing writ large that have come about across the country in recent years. Is there anything that you all notice in your jurisdictions? I could also start with Paul, if you would like.
I mean, I've heard from police officers that there's, not so much since the passage of the accountability bill, but there's, within the last couple of years, there's been somewhat of a disrespect towards police officers. And I don't know if that's just with juveniles, but perhaps with the public, in general, with young offenders, definitely. Like I said before, I mean, I think there needs to be accountability in the juvenile system. And I see with the different revisions, that's somewhat lacking. And I think the kids know that. I've heard complaints from officers who say that, especially with the car theft syndrome, they, when they're booking, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds for car theft, they don't take it seriously. The kids are laughing. There was one instance in Norwalk where a repeat offender had to actually instructed the officer on the proper way to fill out the forms because he was so familiar with it, much more familiar with it than the officer. So, I think when you deal with kids at a young age, there has to be accountability. If there's not, we've got a problem.
That's almost a satirical story that there
Yeah,
is.
no, I mean, it is. It's almost laughable. I mean, that a 14-year-old is sitting in front of a police officer, not at all worried about being, booked for a crime, and is basically treating it like a joke.
Well, like it's already been mentioned, we certainly don't want to arrest juveniles. And an example of that is in Greenwich and in other departments as well. We have a juvenile review board, which is a diversionary program for minor crimes. What happens is the parents come into police headquarters after the offense, and we have a board of residents with expertise in various areas, not just police. And they basically make a contract with us to make, restorative justice, make restitution for the damage or the theft or whatever the circumstances is. We have a contract that they're going to behave for a certain period of time. We work with all of the other support agencies in town, including the school system, so that at the end of a particular time that, that offense kind of is juvenile, and it's not going to be registered as a crime. We have a very high success rate. The one area that we have some recidivism is in drug use, because you don't know where the person is in their addiction. But generally speaking, it's been very effective. The challenge with what's happening now is that a lot of the car thefts are occurring in the cities. The recovery of the cars are in Waterbury, New Haven, Hartford, and that's a challenge because there's no connection to get services to that individual. So we can't work on services for someone who doesn't even live in town. They're just coming into town, taking the car, and then again, that gives them some anonymity in the community they return to, use those vehicles for crime, and then we recover a good, probably 90% of the cars we recover. The other unfortunate trend is we have about 7 of our 70 cars. So about 10% of our cars were recovered in New Jersey. And we've seen that some of the organized crime that come down to Greenwich come up to Greenwich to steal a high-end car are having juveniles. They're soliciting them to do this, knowing that if they do get caught, they're not going to face any serious crime. And under the federal laws, even because there's some of the task forces that are addressing that type of crime, they really aren't going to get any. Again, as we've all said, there's no teeth in the punishment.
And that's pretty a scary thought, that a lot of the gangs, the more senior criminals, understand that because the juvenile laws are as they are and they're hollowed out sufficiently, that they can essentially hire or direct the older teenagers to commit crimes on their behalf, whether it's stealing cars or otherwise, because there's no recourse for those kids. So they're the ones taking advantage of a lot of these older teenagers. And it's happening because there is no real balance or teeth in the juvenile justice laws. There's very little ability to transfer the older repeat offender teenagers to the youthful offender status, which we can talk about a little bit more with Attorney Forensic. But that's a case where it's actually adult criminals who are taking advantage of the younger people. But going back to the juvenile program that you talked about, that is for juvenile offenders in Greenwich, right?
Right. We can only.
It's not for outside the
Correct.
jurisdiction.
You can only do it within your own jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So if they're coming into town and commit the crime, that isn't an option for them.
Mhm.
And there is no connectivity to be able to follow up with it, because they're usually, miles away.
Yeah. And, when we hold forums like this, it's good to share best practices, because perhaps something that's being done in Stamford could be done well in Greenwich or New Canaan, or Greenwich could be done well in Norwalk or Waterbury, and so on. So having this conversation between 169 towns, we could discover best practices if we do it over and over again, and hopefully to reduce, deter, rehabilitate elsewhere in the state. Any other thoughts on what's driving some of these trends or whatnot.
Well, we also see, and I see it almost on a weekly basis, the opioid epidemic, which is, really a scourge, not only my jurisdiction, but, everywhere across the state. Excuse me, I don't think every week I hear from officers in Greenwich. I just had one last week, a call from a Greenwich detective, an 18-year-old overdosed. And, we try to, aggressively go after these people that sell these, illicit substances, which is really poison. So the opioid epidemic is something that I see, is really growing and is really a big concern to the police in my office.
Yeah, I'd also to piggyback what Paul said about the opiate. What we've done is, as you see things change, you mentioned earlier about, you didn't say, but the morale of the police department. You mentioned about whether it be the accountability bill, whether it be post George Floyd and all the rallies after his murder. And I think that's something that plays a role within our department. So in Stamford, we used to have a street crime, basically a unit that would go out there and suppress crime.
Mhm.
Well, after that, with the current climate and listening to the community and saying they didn't want that there anymore, we had to kind of pivot. So our narcotics squad does more investigations. And, we get out there still, we interact with the public in a much different way. So when Paul mentions the opiates, what we've done now is, as he said, we try to go after the sellers to bring closure to the families. But those are labor intensive investigations. Those will take months. We just recently finished one, and I think it was an 11-month investigation to try to track the person who was the last person on the phone with the individual who overdosed. Try to develop a case. The person ended up moving to Bridgeport. We ended up doing an undercover case, arresting the person, and they had the fentanyl pills on them, which were the same ones that were used 11 months earlier. Not the same, but it kind of shows it. But it's a lot of man hours. It's a lot of work. We're not afraid to do it, but that's how you have to pivot in these times, because you're trying to do something you really never did before. When someone overdoses, it wasn't the norm to go after the person that actually delivered the drugs to them. But that's a piece of, as we shift our investigative skills based on the current climate.
Mhm.
Pulling cars over, there's a lot of changes in that now, right? So as they take those things away, we want to make sure we utilize our resources in the right way. And I think that's some of the things that we'll do. We're always thinking, and when you say best practices, the JRB is something that we do, and we may do something, and Leon and Jim will hear about it. There's a lot of chief meetings, so we're always listening to see what the next best thing is. One thing about one thing about Connecticut, when it comes to training, I think we're in top 3 in the country as far as hours for a new recruit. So nobody wants to be painted with the brush of something that happened somewhere else. We want to concentrate on what we do here in Connecticut and try to do it better. And I think that's really one of the things that we like to get back out. We were quiet for 6 months after George Floyd, and we should have been. It was time for us to listen and make sure, do we have to refocus? And I think now it's kind of thankfully it's tilting back to the way we think it should go, which is respect us. We're always thinking progressively, whether it's juvenile crime or whatever the case may be. We're always trying to think what the next best thing is.
Yeah, to kind of touch on what Tim said, I can attribute the rising crime in Connecticut and New Canaan, our area, generally to a number of factors. And I think, one of them certainly related to juveniles is there's no accountability or very little accountability, especially for the repeat offenders and those that are violent. So that really, the solution there is the legislature. They need to change the laws, because now everyone under 18 is a juvenile, and depending on the crimes they commit depends on how they can be treated. But I think the most a juvenile even that commits a violent offense can get is 30 months of probation. And that's just not adequate for that very small percentage of juveniles that are violent and have a whole lot of needs. And I think, as Tim said, being in policing for decades, all of us here, there was a great pause a couple of years ago after the George Floyd murder, and we all kind of looked at things that were happening nationally. And there's no doubt that our police officers are thinking about things that are happening on the national basis, and how Connecticut's police accountability law was pushed through so quickly with not a whole lot of dialogue between those that have been doing this work for decades, because there's some missteps in the law. There's some good And then there's some things that were missed that could make our profession better. And reality is training. We need more training. We need more funding. We need to teach our officers how to do their job right. And let's focus on what's happening in Connecticut too. Let's look at the things that aren't handled well and how we can handle them better and train our officers to handle them better and create policies to do that. Let's not just knee-jerk reaction to something that's happening across the country and create something that doesn't work for us. I think that's the frustration. And every single officer wants to come to work. They don't want to hurt people. They want to do their job. They want to protect people. They want to help people. No one wants to shoot someone. No one wants to hurt someone. They don't come to work with that intent. And officers are human too. Sometimes they make mistakes. And in other parts of the country, officers aren't trained as well as they are in Connecticut. And so you have to keep that in perspective. So this is kind of a collective reason why I think crime is rising in Connecticut. And now's the time. The governor identified it because of a tragedy, but now's the time. If you can push through police accountability in a few months, you can push through juvenile accountability in a similar amount of time.
That's a very good point, because the police accountability bill was 46 sections, very broadly changing how policing is done in Connecticut, and primarily on the basis of a horrible crime and tragedy that was committed halfway across the country, not one that was committed here in Connecticut. And as you say, there's good in that bill, but there's problems in that bill, and there's immense problems in that bill, and those can and should be addressed and reformed. And public policy, like much of life, is about balance, and we need to balance accountability and transparency in policing with the need for proactive policing. As Chief Shaw alluded, cops on the beat, having cops on the street in high crime areas is widely recognized in social science and criminology to be one of the most effective ways at reducing crime and reducing victims and keeping people safe. And the general chilling effect, whether of the police bill or the general climate and attitude towards policing here and around the country after the summer of 2020, has reduced the number of cops on the beat and has increased crime. So balancing things like accountability and transparency with the proactiveness of policing, and in the justice system, balancing mercy and compassion and rehabilitation with accountability and deterrence is also important. So we don't want anything to swing. Me, and I think I could speak for everyone, we don't want anything to swing too far in one direction. But that's why we're here, because we want to see balance, and there probably isn't the proper amount of balance right now, which is why you see some serious crimes increasing at the rate they are.
If I could just add to that, like in Stamford, we have a 14-year-old who's charged with murder right now, and that's not transferable to adult court. So I think, as Ryan indicated, you have to be innovative, regarding our laws. Okay, maybe it's not a bad idea that 14-year-olds generally can't be transferred to adult court, but when you commit a homicide, it's a different situation. The same penalty applies. If he is convicted, he's looking at 18 months of supervision, and a judge at the recommendation of a probation officer can add on an additional 12 months. So 30 months of supervision is what that person will face if he's convicted. And when I say supervision, it could be detention in a secure facility, but not a jail. It could be either at a courthouse facility, or maybe some kind of private, nonprofit secure facility. But 30 months, that's it. And I don't know that that's if that achieves justice, especially for the victim's family.
And going back to some of the instances we've seen in Connecticut, there'll be 13 arrests, 12 arrests for felony crimes. And in the case in New Britain, where someone stole a car and ran over a jogger and killed the pedestrian just a month or two ago, that was the 13th arrest for that 17-year-old, and in just a 3-year period of time. So Paul, what is it in the law currently that would enable, because it sounds unbelievable to me.
Well, if that person was only charged with crimes that could not be transferable to adult court, the case remains in juvenile court. So there's nothing, there's, the juvenile system controls at that point. And, there's really no incarceration or no bail, no bond, no long, that person is basically, his detention status will be reviewed every 7 days. And in all likelihood, I could fully understand that, he would be out, and that's why he was out. I don't know what he was charged with, but generally speaking, all A and B felonies are automatically transferred to adult court, but there are a number of exceptions. For instance, larceny 1 is an exception. That's a B felony, but it's not transferable to adult court. So if you're a repeat high-end car theft perpetrator, you're not going to be facing adult court. Your case is going to stay in juvenile court. Some of the exceptions are very bizarre. For instance, if you commit a burglary, first-degree burglary, which generally speaking is a burglary at night, the case will be transferable. It will be transferred, but if you harm someone in the process, it remains in juvenile court. So it doesn't seem to make any sense to me at all. I think that's something that the legislature should look at. But in answer to your question, I mean, yeah, if that person was charged only with offenses that remain in juvenile court, it remains there. If that person, even in cases where the case is transferred to adult court, we can then deal with the concept of youthful offender, and that's a system that's still in place where 16 and 17-year-olds, even though their case is transferred to adult court, are treated differently than adults.
Yep.
Their case is automatically sealed when it comes in. Jail, although it's a possibility, is a rarity. It's all based on services, probation, therapeutic, services that can make the person, get back, in line. The difference between youthful offender status and the juvenile system is that there is a threat of jail. So the person, when we resolve the case, if the person, and in all likelihood, they get probation, if they violate their probation, there is at least that threat of incarceration, which doesn't exist in the juvenile system. Now, that doesn't mean the person, there's always going to be bumps in the road, especially when you deal with, young kids. But if the person is a repeat offender, repeatedly violates his probation, at least there is that threat. So there's, you talk about the carrot and the stick. There's that stick of jail that, will, hopefully reform the person. Now, the person gets no criminal record if he or she proceeds in youthful offender status. Once that person achieves the age of 21, all records, all police reports are completely expunged. So it was a very effective system, which, it's sort of become obsolete because now 16 and 17-year-olds go through the juvenile system. So we don't have an opportunity to treat these people in that status.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. The only time we really get them is when they commit crimes that generally a youthful offender is not available. For instance, homicide. You wouldn't be treated as a youthful offender if you committed murder. So it's that was a very effective program, which unfortunately is not used as much because there's no need for it. The kids are staying in juvenile court; they're not coming to adult court.
Mm-hmm. And again, the concept is that it would be very, very rare that any sort of incarceration would actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a prosecutor for almost 34 years. I worked in the Part B division where, most of these cases come in, and I've never had a case where someone was treated as a youthful offender and went to jail based on that adjudication. There may be some cases where if the person continued to offend and violated probation, that person might go in for a period of time. But like I said, it's a rarity.
But yet the threat and deterrence being an important part of criminal justice, just like rehabilitation is,
right,
will prevent more of these episodes from occurring, because most of these older teenagers, and certainly the gangs that are sometimes taking advantage of them and conscripting them, are actually aware of what the rules of the game are.
Absolutely. And I should just add, if you were found to be a youthful offender, you weren't convicted of a crime, you were convicted of a status. So you never had that criminal record that would,
Mhm.
lag on to you. And again, at 21, everything was erased. So it was effective.
Yep, it's light touch. And if it prevents people from going down the wrong road in the first place, then it actually
It's
is
its
reducing, it's reducing the number of kids who get put into the system. And it's
Agreed.
reducing the number of victims too.
True.
Chief Shaw, did you want to discuss?
No, that was the one that he was just talking about.
Okay,
Ju-
great.
Just give you that for later.
Got it.
I brought it up earlier.
Thank you.
I think that's the problem, is what he mentioned, the 14-year-old who can commit the murder. If he's a freshman in high school, he's out by his senior year. He's never in jail, but he's within 4 years, he's out. And if he doesn't do anything for another couple of years, no one knows he committed murder. And I think that's something that's, dangerous. It's something that we have to really look at. And again, we're not looking at, we echo this point because we never wanted this to be misconstrued that we're going after juveniles. We're not. We just want to make sure that there's somebody on the other side that says, okay, this person's now, it's not based on a 36-month limit. It's based on when is this person, when is this poor child well enough to go back in society? And I think that's our point.
Well, that too is this, just to get adequate services, because you look at 13 and 14-year-olds that are getting into cars, stealing cars. There's family services, there's educational requirements, there may be mental health issues. There's all kinds of things that are going on. And that lack of accountability is only just one part of their socialization. The other concern is drug use. Like, we've mentioned all of these things, but I think we're saying that, in addition to what we're doing, we also need other areas of focus on children. I mean, the Greenwich Together, which is a drug prevention coalition in Greenwich, has 31 different agencies that work to try to reduce alcohol and drug use. And our recent survey indicated that there were kids in the 8th grade or 7th grade, or middle school students, with drug use, with vaping and those types of things. And as that age gets lower, we need to approach it. If people are trying to prepare their son or daughter to be a freshman in high school, when there's a big change, when you start socializing with adults, seniors are 18, that's a big change, but it's almost like you need to start way sooner than that in giving people those social skills and tools that they need to be successful in their education process and in socializing with everybody else. So it's just one part of a holistic effort at trying to save these kids from a real unfortunate lifestyle.
And putting more teeth or putting more accountability into the youthful offender status or the juvenile system will trigger the use of more of these social services, because they're basically force them to be utilized. Right now, they could be available, but there's really no mechanism, or there's few mechanism for necessarily ensuring that they are used. And so we want to make use of them and make sure that these programs are productive. And I'll go into some of the proposals that my caucus made in the state Senate, a better way for a safer Connecticut, and reform a lot of these statutes. But one of the main sections of that is beefing up a lot of the social services that will build social capital and reduce the rationale for a lot of young men, younger people generally, start to engage in a life of crime and go down the wrong path. But actually, one thought that came to mind in terms of socializing younger people earlier with authority in a productive way is the student resource officers in a lot of our schools. I remember when I went to Greenwich High, the student resource officer, the SRO, was introduced when I was there for the first time. And I think now there's 2 at the high school. And these programs are starting to be utilized around the state as a way of not only keeping our schools safer, but also of introducing maybe more at-risk kids in a more in an easier way with police officers in the school. And there has been some pushback against the existence of the school resource officers in Connecticut, including from a US Senator. But I would like to hear maybe some reaction to those programs in the high schools. I assume it's positive in Greenwich High because they added one.
Well, Carlos Franco said that you didn't really come to his attention too often when you were at Greenwich High, but I guess we're not supposed to. It's all a race now.
Was the deterrence?
The
Yeah.
deterrence.
Yeah.
when we first attempted a school resource officer program in Greenwich, it actually was turned down. We had to return the federal money. So about 12 years ago, we tried another approach and tried to make sure that everyone understood that it was going to be a team effort between the school administration and the police department to have this support. This individual school resource officer is not just there to arrest people, and arresting juveniles in the school system is their last resort, and it rarely happens. But what we're trying to do is develop a relationship with as many students as possible. But we're also part of a interdisciplinary team between the social services, the educators, the school administrators, and the police department for crisis intervention. And on numerous occasions, we've been able to address emotional concerns or mental health issues that have probably prevented crimes or prevented injury or illness. So it's been a very positive situation. We had one school resource officer there for many years, and when we decided to have him be rotated out because he had been there for many years, when we brought the second one on, we had a kind of a ride in the passenger seat for a couple of months, and they recognized that having the two school resource officers was really a positive effect. And although the Board of Education didn't fund it, I now have two school resource officers at Greenwich High School. And another aspect of it is that we've trained a number of our special victim detectives to be school resource officers so they can fill in. And as we do that, we have we have about the largest concentration of people in the town of Greenwich at any one time is during the school day at Greenwich High. There's about 3,000 people there. But we also have 3 middle schools. So now we have a relationship with these special victim detectives that are at the middle schools so we can address some of those concerns. We've also added a mentorship program. So we have 2 of the 3 middle schools have officers who volunteer to go in and have lunch with a student during the semester, and they develop a relationship with that officer to make sure they're doing well in school and to have a positive role model other than their parent, or of course in addition to their parent. And we've had a lot of positive results about that. But I think that it would be a disservice for us to say we should pull the school resource officers out again because of a few bad actors or unfortunate circumstances. But there's so many positives to having the school resource officers in there. I think that there'd be parents uprise if I said, oh, we're going to take them out. So I think that there's also, Carlos Franco, who was the first school resource officer. I talk about how he was such influential. He was the student, he was their class speaker his last year. The graduating class selected him. But that's kind of a nice gesture. But what was a better gesture is when I see students, graduates who had gone into the military or off to college and will see me and ask about, hey, how's Carlos? What's Carlos doing? Because of that relationship. And I've also had a couple of officers, and again, I'm not. I have one more week till the closing of the. Because we're all suffering from shortages of police officers, but I've had I have officers now and the members of the department who graduated from Greenwich High who were under the kind of the guidance of Carlos Franco and Hayes Scaglio, and now we have two other school resource officers, and just starting Fred Reich and Chris Wallace, and they've come back to the department, so they're a positive product of that partnership with the school. So again, and I have another week. If you have anyone who would like to be a Greenwich police officer, they should apply. It doesn't have to come from Stamford or New Canaan, of course, but again, it's one of those challenges with all that's going on. And I think some of the chiefs have already mentioned is like it isn't easy to be a police officer with all the challenges and all the negativity there. So we're trying to encourage people of good moral character to apply and take all of those skills and add to our diversity to make our job even the police department even more effective by doing that.
Yeah, so we have a school resource officer in our high school and also our middle school / junior high school, and both enormously successful programs. Lots of cooperative effort between the administration at the schools and our school resource officer. And this is once again another national issue that was pointed to as a problem perhaps in other parts of the country or in other parts of our state, for the reason why school resource officers shouldn't be in schools. And in our area, it's precisely why school resource officers should be in our schools and have to be there. And we don't arrest kids unless it's a last resort, like Chief Heavey said. And it's such a successful program, and it protects our kids, and it's a fabric part of the community so much that there's no reason why we should remove them. And I was kind of offended when I hear people talking about taking them out of our schools. Well, let's focus on the areas where the programs are mismanaged or aren't fulfilling the needs of the community and fix that. Let's not have a blanket approach to this issue and just remove all the school resource officers out of every jurisdiction in Connecticut. Let's look specifically at the facts, and let's fix it when there's a problem, not when there's not a problem.
Yeah, and it probably stops escalation in the first place. So it stops bad scenarios, violent scenarios from ever happening in the first place, which I think is especially important at big high schools like we have in this district, especially Greenwich High School, which is like 3,000 people.
Sure.
I think in Stamford, there are arrests occasionally. We have years where it's great. And I think post-COVID and this year, September, October, we probably had more arrests than we normally do. And we think that's also from the kids being locked up in their house and having some beefs that they didn't get to see people. But what we say to our SROs, who again, the fabric of the school, the superintendent, if anytime we have a discussion of manpower issues, if I have to move people from around my department to try to fulfill what I need in patrol, the superintendent says, please don't. So if the principal is saying it, if the superintendent is saying it, and then anytime we do make an arrest, we make contact with the principal and say, hey, if you didn't have any SROs, would you have called us to make the arrest? And every time the answer is yes. And they always say, but because your SROs are here, you know how many more times we don't have to make that arrest.
Yes.
And I think Stanford's a bigger city, and yes, some things happen in those school systems, but the relationship with the kids, with the school system, it's second to none. The superintendent wants it. And just recently, I was talking to a retired Stanford officer who was my classmate, who was an SRO at West Hill for years, and she had just came back from a wedding from a student. She was invited to a wedding, and her only relationship with her was an SRO. So I think that kind of proves what it is. It's a shame that not a lot of people listen to these stories because they have a different agenda, but I think it's a very successful program.
I wanted to maybe switch gears a little bit because I would like to field maybe questions from anyone in the room at the end. But the last topic I wanted to touch on is what changes to the system legislatively, policy wise, in practice or whatever, do you think would address a lot of these nascent or major problems that we're seeing in Connecticut, especially the car thefts or the rise in violence and shootings and homicides? I'm sure Paul has thought a lot about it, so I could start with him and maybe come down the line.
Sure.
And I'll end.
I think with regard to the juveniles, I mean, one of the proposal was transferring repeat offenders being transferred to adult court. And I think that's something that the legislature, certainly should consider, because like I said before, it's not, if you have a repeat offender for a juvenile offender for either drugs or car theft, when they come into the system, they're not going to be treated like an adult. They're going to really transfer into the Youthful Offender Program. And like I said, it's a therapeutic, progressive program that we've had for years. So they're not going to get a criminal record in all likelihood. If the judge allows them into youthful offender, allows that status, which 99% of the time that will happen, they'll be treated, given the nature of their age, they're going to be treated fairly. They're going to be treated appropriately. But I think to continually have juveniles just, sort of languish in the juvenile system with no accountability is a real negative. I also like the idea of when a juvenile is arrested, having them coming to court the next day, that they realize that this is something serious. It's not something, you go to court 2 weeks later. It's not a joke. It's something with consequences. So I think that would be a major improvement. But like I said, I mean, I think they have to reconsider, the legislature as well, what crimes are not automatically, transferred. The judge has a right to do a discretionary transfer, but the judge has to consider the best interests of the child and the best interests of the public. And in that calculus, when is it ever in the best interest of the child to be transferred to adult court? I think most judges grapple with that issue and end up keeping the case in juvenile court. So I think transferring, having a transfer of repeat offenders to adult court would definitely be a step in the right direction.
I think what you mentioned about legislation and how it could help. Leon had mentioned earlier about funding for training. So some of the things that have been asked in the accountability bill cost money.
Yes.
Right? Some of them are technical, whether it be dash cameras and things like that. But there's some good out of it too, because some of it was for mental health. And we know across the board that the mental health calls that we go on have increased exponentially in the last 5 years. So again, in Stamford being a much bigger city, one of the things they asked was the feasibility of having a social worker inside the police department. 10 years ago, we would never even considered that. Well, we hired one. We have someone working Monday through Friday, and they follow up on every mental health call we have. So that's a benefit for both the community, the family, and the officer, because the officer doesn't want to go back there. He doesn't have the technical skills or the medical background to do that. So we've been doing that. It's been very successful. This person that we hired has a lot of clinical background. She deals with the courthouse, she deals with the school, she deals with the family, and she finds the resources that our officers never had that tool on their belt.
Yes.
So that was a very important part of us seeing things differently. Now, we always say we want to be more progressive and see if there's something else we could do. There was a lot of noise about why do the officers go on mental health calls if they don't have to. So a second initiative that we did was we spoke with our EMS and we asked for buy-in with our EMS division, our EMS emergency medical service. I'm trying to say it's not a squad, it's a service. We'll go with service. Anyway, we met with them and we said, listen, if there's any chance from previous calls from the call taker, dispatcher, if there's any obvious chance of you being any kind of safety issue, we're coming with you. We're the first ones in the door. We make it safe, which is what we always do. And then you handle the call. Well, we've again pivoted a little bit. And what we do now is if the dispatcher and everyone says it's a 17-year-old despondent person who had a bad day, in the past, when you call that, you're getting probably a sergeant, a patrolman, an ambulance. So you may just hope that you're trying to get your child help. And all of a sudden your front lawn is filled with about 4 different cars. So now we stage there and we let the ambulance go in and handle themselves. So that's reduced. That's been about a 25% reduction in our calls to service for these specific mental health calls. So it's important to listen to what the community says. And if you have the funding or, the wherewithal to be able to make that agreement with EMS, not everyone's going to do that. And, knock on wood, we haven't had a assault of an EMS worker. So right now it's something that is working. We've listened. And I think, especially in the mental health world, as everyone knows who's a teacher, who's in the schools and there's paras, my wife's a teacher. This is obviously a crisis for the school system. And we go on these calls more than I could speak for Stamford, but there's more calls in this venue than there's ever been before.
That's good to hear.
Yes, I'll make a few points. The first point is lock your car, take your valuables in. It's the most preventable crime there is. If you take your keys in and don't leave your valuables in the car, you won't become a victim. We have many videos of these kids going car to car to car. If the car is locked, they go to another car, and ultimately if they find a car that's unlocked and they steal it or take from it. So that's point one. Point two is related to juvenile crime. I think our legislature really needs to take a hard look, especially for the repeat offenders and the violent offenders that are juveniles. Get them the help they need, get them comprehensive services, provide GPS, get them everything they need to help them on the path to recovery and to become productive adults and not adult criminals. That's what we want to prevent from happening. And frankly, I'm afraid that in one of our jurisdictions in Fairfield County, there'll be a tragedy. One of these kids will be stealing a car, there'll be confrontation with a homeowner, and something really horrible will happen. So this is a preventative message, if nothing else. Third point is training. I would love for the state to fund and provide regional training centers in Connecticut. Teach our officers the right way to do things, the proper way to de-escalate, and teach them to be safe so they can go home to their families, and also so they can make the right decisions every virtually every time they go out and handle a violent situation. These officers are running towards danger. They're putting themselves at risk. Some of their families may not think they're going to come home because of the things that they have to deal with. So let's give them the tools and the training that they need to make things safer for everybody in Connecticut. And the last point is, everyone out there, if you see a police officer, say thank you. These officers from every department, they come to work every day trying to do the right thing. And the national sentiment, and to some degree, Connecticut sentiment has been, hey, we don't appreciate you. You're hurting people, you're killing people, and you're doing bad things. And I think that has hurt a lot of officers in Connecticut. So next time you see a police officer, say thank you. Say we care about you too. And thank you for doing the job that you do to protect and serve us.
I think I agree with everybody's sentiments about stuff. In the Greenwich Police Department, we're a little bit different because we're first responders to medical emergencies. So our officers are emergency medical technicians. But to address some of the concern with crisis intervention, we have crisis intervention training for the officers and for the dispatchers so they can better triage the call so that we send only what's necessary. So again, we keep from filling up the driveway with more cars than are needed. And I think they've had some success. I echo the call and the necessity for more training. And again, that's something that, a lot of these are unfunded mandates that we need, we need to get the resources that we need to meet those. And then what Paul mentioned about next day court appearance, it's been the state law for probably 25 years that if an individual is arrested for domestic violence, that they have to appear in court the next day. And I think we do a disservice to our juvenile offenders by pressing the snooze button on their services in the court. So I think if we can get them there sooner and make it more meaningful in many ways, that it'll probably, it can turn them around, save their lives, save other people's lives. So it's really important. I think the word crisis could be used too often, but I really think that this is a crisis and that it needs to be addressed. And again, with the fact that the accountability bill went through so fast, I think we could be as equally fast with getting a juvenile reform bill through the state legislatures. And I just appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Of course. And I think everyone tonight has seen, if they don't fully realize it already, how professional and thoughtful and balanced the leadership of our police departments is across this district. And I know it's similar for a lot of other places in the state. And Chief Krolikowski's point about the fact that officers are willing to put their safety at risk in order to keep us safe is important to remember, especially recently when we've seen attempts on officers' lives in Connecticut recently, in Hartford just last week, and recently in Farmington, where Officer James O'Donnell was looking after a stolen car, which was a theft of which was committed by a repeat offender who drove away and in doing so rammed Officer O'Donnell into another car, wedged him there, crushed his lower body, and put him in the hospital. And thank God he is now out of the hospital and he's in a wheelchair. And I know he's working hard on his recovery. And he's also joining us tonight on the Zoom. Hopefully I'll speak for a couple minutes on some of our recommendations as a Senate caucus, but maybe we can find him. It's either Chris or his wife is Chris O'Donnell, or he's James O'Donnell. And we're very appreciative of his service to our state, and his dedication to public safety. And I know that we're all wishing him a speedy recovery. But because of the problems that our state has faced in public safety in the past 18 months, our Republican Senate caucus, the 13 of us, came together and issued a comprehensive set of proposals that seek to focus on three areas in particular. The first is reforms to our criminal justice laws, which we've probably talked about the most tonight, in order to deter crime from being committed in the first place and have a balanced approach when dealing with sentencing, especially younger offenders. The second is bolstering and improving our social services. So we ensure that there's mentorship, that there's vocational training, that there are summer jobs for young adults who are potentially at risk so they can engage society and build skills in a productive way rather than have a greater incentive to go down the wrong path. And finally is policies to promote proactive policing, stop crime from happening in the first place. And that requires changes to the sweeping police reform bill passed last summer, the 46 parts, which probably did have a chilling effect on policing and contributed to the rise in shootings and homicides across our state. Those are the three parts to the proposal, and it's pretty comprehensive. And we're running out of time tonight, but if you go to senatorfazio.com, you could find a better way to a safer Connecticut and read the proposals there. And again, this is an earnest attempt to start a dialogue with the legislature, with our friends on the other side, in order to solve this problem. There's probably dozens and dozens of parts to this plan. There's dozens and dozens of policy proposals in here. And I think accepting any significant number of them will go a long way to reducing crime and keeping everyone safe and stopping a lot of our more vulnerable members of our community in this state from going down the wrong path and keeping them safe in the long run as well, rather than just the victims. So I am excited and hopeful that we can convene hopefully sooner than the regular session in the winter in order to address these problems that we're facing. The numbers, excuse me, the numbers are undeniable. A 31% annual increase in homicides is not acceptable. It's not normal. Connecticut can do better. A 41% increase in car thefts, and in some cases, 100% annual increases in car thefts is not acceptable. So smart reforms balance equal protection under the law, justice, compassion, rehabilitation, and also deterrence and accountability are all necessary to keeping Connecticut safe writ large. So I'm very thankful for the chiefs and the state's attorney for joining us tonight. I'm also willing to entertain questions, take questions from anyone in the audience here right now.
Which proposal you mentioned by Senator who?
So if you go to my website, senatorfazio.com, there will be a link to the plan. We actually have a pile of the plans that we printed out right up there that anyone in attendance can grab and read on their own. Again, I believe in the proposals. I think they'd go a long way to making us safer as a state. I also think that they're meant to be a conversation starter with our friends on the other side of the aisle in Hartford. We want to make any positive change that we can in order to reduce crime and keep people safe here. Yes, sir.
So at the beginning, I'm sorry, I forget which of the chiefs that it was, but one of the chiefs brought up an idea of a place where juvenile offenders could go that wasn't quite prison and wasn't quite the current system, where it'd be more of a supporting kind of facility. And then later on brought up was the idea of moving them to the young offender, the youthful offenders of the adult sort of spectrum of the court. Do you think it'd be more productive towards rehabilitating them keeping them as in the juvenile court and putting them in that sort of facility that's more dedicated toward improving them a little more upscale than what we have now for them, or by moving them up to the adult courts and putting them in a youthful offender status?
That's a very good question. Paul might want to take
I mean,
it.
I would agree with you. The problem is it doesn't exist.
That's right.
We used to have the training school, Long Lane. It was a jail, but it was very therapeutic. I've spoken to juvenile probation officers who, frankly, juvenile public defenders who actually had a favorable impression of it. It was closed, I don't know, maybe close to 10 years ago. I think it was a shame that they did that. I mean, it was a jail. I'm not going to deny it, but I totally agree with you. I think the state should invest in centers that, short of being a jail, are really mandatory that they stay there, but they're therapeutic in nature. We don't have it, unfortunately, but it would be great if we did. It's a matter of money.
Well, yes, go ahead.
Speaking for Chief, so you were talking about, so I attended Greenwich High School, and you were talking about how a lot of generally the vehicular crimes were coming from, and it was a common sight that gangs outside of the state were recruiting people in your respective towns and cities to steal the cars for them, knowing that the punishment would be reduced. Has there been, I've only been at GHS for a couple of months, so has there been, or do you think in the future there'll be an attempt at sort of informing kids about the risk that comes with this? Because I feel like I've never been in that position, but I feel like a lot of kids might not really realize kind of what's going on and be in that position until it's a little bit too late. So do you think that, has there been, or do you think that there will be any attempt at sort of educating kids about that?
No, sure. As a matter of fact, I'll speak to both of the school resource officers tomorrow. And of course, I'll probably put some of my signs out and the exits to the high school. I think there's an opportunity whenever we can engage in a positive way that the young people at the school to get the word out. The Greenwich Together, which is the Anti-Drug Coalition, we actually have a youth board as well, and they meet with us on occasion to try to help with getting the word out. So I take that as a good suggestion that maybe we have people remind their parents to lock their cars, and especially when you have teenagers and you're sharing the driveway, you know, a lot of times that's part of the whole thing is it's convenience. So if we can help them with that part of it, that's a great idea.
Could you do me, how old are you?
I'm 14.
7 years, come to Stanford.
But if you join the Greenwich Police
Yeah, I got it.
Explorers
I
now.
already got it. I struck first.
He's a member of the Explorers. There you go.
Oh, good. We like to take them too.
We're doing a pretty good job in the Greenwich schools, aren't we?
Excellent.
Chris, is there anything online that you?
I think the individual you mentioned, O'Donnell. Was
Yes.
listed. I think they raised their hand.
Sure, if he'd like to say hello.
I'm curious if the open border has affected crime in Connecticut or our surrounding areas that you're aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Most of the crime that we've had has been identified by the suspects that we know are either people from out of the city in different jurisdictions. Our investigative division usually follows that up. And I don't recall that in the last couple of months of anything like that.
We all heard about the flights coming into Westchester Airport and dropping off migrants and then busing them to surrounding areas. I'm wondering if that's impacted anything in any of the crimes in our area.
Nothing I have documented.
Yeah, nothing in Greenwich so far.
So it's sort of a longer term kind of thing, but do you think that you were talking about that a lot of the crime that happens in this sort of area is coming from other cities that's being transferred down here? And do you think that I know in recent years, crime, specifically in New York, has resurged a little bit, and it was way worse many years ago, and it was sort of dealt with early 2000s, started getting a little bit better, and now it's starting to shift back a little bit. Do you think that the uptick in crime there has affected us here?
I'd say probably 20% of the cars stolen from Greenwich are recovered in New York. 5 in the Bronx, some in Long Island, some in the city, Queens, Rye. And of course, to get down as far as Newark, we had 7 recoveries down there. So definitely taking some of the thefts there.
The murder was off of 120.
And for our friends in New York City, they eliminated cash bail, for instance, which has a positive deterrent effect on crime. And there are instances of some of these criminals coming up from New York City and being offended when they are arrested in Connecticut and find out that there is cash bail. So there's
I was going to say that, right?
yeah. So I might have learned it from you, but there are examples of where Connecticut hasn't gone too far in the wrong direction, and so we want to be vigilant about stopping more bad proposals from being implemented.
Right. You have to remember in New York with their bail reform, they've essentially done away in great measure with cash bail. So when you are accused of a crime, you get conditions, but there's no you don't have to put up any cash to show that you're going to come back. And We have not had that here yet, thank God.
Mhm. Chris,
We do have some questions in the chat on Zoom. If you want to read that out.
my prescription's not good enough.
Read it.
Yes, please.
From Kristen O'Donnell. I
Yes,
believe is the wife of.
James, yes.
Is it possible to find the trends and hold juveniles accountable before they commit L1s?
I mean, like I said before, I mean, the courts are a reactive agency. They come to us when they were arrested. I mean, we would like to see them get the services before they, get into the system, whether it's in the juvenile courts or in the adult court. But I don't know how I mean, it's a matter of, what kind of, parental supervision do they have? What is their life growing up? These are, factors that unfortunately the courts and the police have no control over. Perhaps the schools do, but they're already overburdened. People go to school to learn, not to, be, disciplined. So that's a great question. I just don't know the answer. It would be great, if we could provide these services beforehand when they're identified at risk. I think we do have these kind of services already. They need to be increased, obviously.
One of the examples I can give real quick is that we had a female victim of a homicide on the east side of Stamford about a year and a half ago. The grandmother took on the 14-year-old boy. And she came to us through one of my assistant chiefs who's known very well in the community. It was the school, it was the social worker, it was the grandmother, it was myself. And we knew this kid wanted to play basketball at the high school. So we also brought in a basketball mentor. And we spent an hour with him. But, that's that hour of trying to have impact. That's bringing the whole, it takes a village. We had the village in my office and we spoke to this boy for about over an hour and had him set up for weekend basketball training and really try to get him on the right path because his grandmother said he's going down the wrong path. 10 days later, he was involved in a stolen car. It crashed. He got hurt. Not that, but that it does take a village, and we do make those attempts. So when we do identify them, like the question that just came up, you identify them, you do the best you can. But if you spend an hour with them, they've got another 23 when they leave you. So it doesn't stop us from trying, but
I think that's why the SROs are so great. They're advocates. They're confidants to these kids.
Yeah, and they can see them every day.
In my job, they identify these issues before they get out of hand.
That's right. And so much of this program about a proper policing policies and a good criminal justice system is stopping bad things from before they happen and deterrence. And it can't be punitive, but it also has to have some negative incentive from bad things escalating. And a school resource officer is a good example of a nice balance between those things, because as Chief Shaw said, in any of the bad cases where there was violence in one of the high schools, the police department would have been called to come to the school, irrespective of whether there was a school resource officer there or not. But the school resource officer probably prevents a lot of these negative instances from occurring in the first place. So balance is necessary. And our general concerns about the state and state public policy is that there isn't balance as is. And so hopefully this conversation could go a long way to establishing a sense of balance in our public policy in this state, reducing crime, keeping people safe, and creating a brighter future for everyone in Connecticut. So I think we've basically come to the end of our time. So is there any other point?
Two more, a follow-up from Kristen and then one more question.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so let's do the follow-up first. Do you believe L1s being transferred to adult court would impact society tremendously?
Well,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by impact society. I think, larceny one is, something of the value over $20,000. That's a lot of money. Look, I have no problem with a juvenile, first-time offender remaining, in juvenile court, but my issue is with the recidivists, the repeat offenders who are, keep going out and doing this. So, as far as impacting society, if it were transferred, I think it would I think it would be, beneficial for the recidivists.
I mean, and our caucus tends to agree with that for repeat offenders, someone doing it 3, 4, 5 times, committing a felony, committing larceny 1, 13 times, there needs to be some recourse. And whether that's with more teeth in the juvenile system or whether that's with the youthful offender status designation for larceny 1, when it's 3, 4, 5, 13 times, that's necessary to stop real dangerous scenarios from happening. It would, if that was in place, if that policy was in place, then the auto theft that resulted in the pedestrian dying, the jogger dying in New Britain would not have happened, because there would have been recourse before the 13th time for that 17-year-old who committed the crime. So I think it is necessary. I think it would have a positive outcome. It would reduce the number of people committing the crime as well as the victims. And what's the last question?
The last question comes in from Jeff Hogan. The state of Connecticut has some of the most stringent officer certification and training requirements in the country, and many departments also have comprehensive accreditation to cover all of their policies and procedures. What can LE leaders do to help educate the public about thoroughness of training and department accreditation?
It's a good question. I mean, we happen to be nationally accredited, our department, one of 3 in Fairfield County, so we're pretty proud of that. And that's one of the tenets in the police accountability law that is probably a good thing. But it's going to be difficult for all departments in Connecticut to achieve CLIA status, which is the highest level of accreditation you can achieve. So certainly we try to promote that as much as possible, the benefits of it and why it's a great thing. But going to the training, I think Chief Shaw said we're the 3rd highest trained in the nation. I want Connecticut to be the 1st highest trained in the nation. So that's why the legislature needs to devote funds and training facilities to provide our officers with the tools they need and to teach them to do the things the right way every time, so they can go home to their families and they can make the right decision without someone getting hurt that doesn't need to be.
And Greenwich is a tier 1 accredited agency from the state, one of 32 in the state. Again, we're working on tier 2, and some of our outreach, from our Citizens Police Academy to our Explorer program to trying to be involved in all the community things. We're actually conducting a survey right now, customer satisfaction. Customer used to be kind of a word that bothered officers. Well, what do you mean? I don't have customers, but we do. And so we have a customer satisfaction survey right now. You can go to the town website and kind of report what you think are positives about all the different services, well, everything from Parks and Rec to education to the police department, fire department, and that's helpful to us. We do solicit and appreciate when we get feedback. We do occasionally get civilian complaints, but we get far more civilian compliments to the officers, and I guess we just have to highlight those. We do things like Officer of the Month and other things to get the word out about the officer. One of the things, and it's a small thing, but I kind of went home on Sunday night in a real positive way. I was out in uniform on Halloween, and I was so psyched about how many cops I saw going door to door for candy. Not officers, but kids dressed as cops. So I saw three SWAT kids dressed in full SWAT gear, and I pulled over and got out and took a picture with them, and it kind of was a little bit. I felt good about the fact that there were far more policemen than there were firemen or doctors or any of those people out there. That for a change, for a while, it was good to have a change.
I can't endorse everything you say up here. So on that note, I really appreciate all your time and all your service to our community. We're lucky to have you here in Lower Fairfield County. I appreciate everyone joining this conversation. As always, you can find out about how to contact me at senatorfazio.com. I try to be very responsive, and I look forward to continuing this conversation in the coming weeks and months as well. Have a good night.